resolution as well, like right here. This is a 4K resolution. 3840 by 2160. Let me just collapse that again and let me just create that new sequence again. Go back to that same window, head over to settings. I'm going to stay working in 25 frames, which is good. And for the frame size, I'm going to choose that 4K resolution. And honestly, that is everything you need to know. Don't worry too much about all of the other settings. As you are starting out, none of these things really matter that much. Let's go to the bottom now and give that sequence a name. For instance, my Iceland video. It's completely up to you how you name that. Click OK. And there we go. Look at that. We've got a timeline now. And in the project window, you can see that our timeline or our sequence is an actual item. That means I can delete this. There we go. Now our timeline is gone. No worries. I can just create our timeline again. Go to sequence, settings, 25 frames, 4K resolution. Call that my Iceland video again. And there we go, our sequence is back. But I can also create another sequence. We are not bound to one timeline or one sequence. We can work with multiple. So I can just go back to here, new item, sequence, and let's give this one a different name. For instance, horses, because I did shot a lot of horses on my travel trip, and I might want to make a different, like a second video about the horses alone. And so I can do that. Now I have two sequences. And you can see here in your timeline that we have two tabs now of both sequences. If you close one of these, don't worry, you can just double click on them in your project window to open it up again in the timeline. All right, that is all fun and games. We're going to explore working with multiple sequences later in this course. For now, let's close horses. I'm also going to delete that sequence and let's just focus on one sequence now. All right, we want to bring our media files into this timeline. Let's do that. I'm going to browse to my video folders. Let me just double click on it. And let's open up camera. Here we are. Here are all of my video files. And if I move my mouse over these, I can see a preview of these video files. Now, there are two ways of bringing these into the timeline. I can just take them and drag them into the timeline like so. And I want to zoom in a little bit more so that I can see better what's going on. I can use the scroll bar here on the bottom and take this outer part to just move that inwards. And that way I'm just zooming into that timeline to get a better view. I can also expand the video tracks themselves. You can see here that we have different video tracks. We got V1, V2, V3, and so on. The same thing for the audio tracks. And in between here, we can just take that and expand that video track a bit, like so. The same thing goes for the audio track. We can just expand it a bit, give it some more space so that we can actually see what's going on in here. All right, so now we have that entire clip in the timeline. But maybe I don't want that, because if I'm going to play back this video clip by hitting the space bar on my keyboard, here in my program monitor, we can then see what's going on. But you know, it's pretty long. I just need like a small part of that clip. And you know, there are different ways of doing that. We can start trimming this clip. That means we can just take the outsides and just trim a part of that clip. Don't worry, we are not deleting anything. We are just making selections here. And that is what video editing is all about. You just make selections. I can cut off a piece from the beginning as well. There we go. So now I'm just left with this clip here in my timeline. And I do have a gap here in the beginning, so we want to close that. Just take that clip and move it back to the beginning. So this is one way of editing. Just drag your clips into the timeline, and let me just zoom out a bit again like that. And we can trim off a part from the beginning, trim a part off from the end, and make my selection that way. But there is a different way of editing, the professional way. So let me just delete all of the clips in the timeline, and let's go back to my project window here. Let's start with the first clip right here. And what I'm actually gonna do is just double click on it. Doing so, we'll open it up in this source monitor right here. The source monitor just displays the videos that are in your project window. So I can play them back in here. I can just press play to play the video back in the source monitor. And let's say that I want to have like this part of the video. What I can then do is make a selection in here. So I can say, all right, my video has to start at this point. I'm going to set an in point at that point. And there's a button down here that says mark in. Clicking on that will create an in point, and everything after that in point will be selected. I can then scrub forward in time and set an out point with this button right here. Mark out. And now only that part of the video is selected. And what I can do now is simply take that video from the source monitor and drag that into my timeline. And only that selection that I have set right here is being imported into my timeline. Now this means that I can make multiple selections of the same clip, because maybe I also like something on the end right here, where we focus more on the sun. Let me set an in point as well there. Go a little bit further in time and set an out point and drag that part as well into my timeline next to it. There we go. By the way, if you want to zoom in and out on your timeline, there is an easier way of doing that, and that is by holding down your Alt key on the keyboard and just using your scroll wheel on the mouse to zoom in. And by not holding down Alt, you can just scroll sideways like that. All right, so let me just select another clip. Let's say this here, which is Kim, my wife. She's walking here in the snow. And let me just look for a nice part. Like here, I'm a little bit wobbly in the beginning, so maybe like this part looks pretty good. Again, in and out point. But there's a faster way of doing that with your keyboards. In point, E from in, so let's press the I key on your keyboards. Here we go. We set an in point. Go forward in time and set an out point. You guessed it, the O key on your keyboard. In and out. The first two most important short keys you're learning right now. All right, let me just drag that into the timeline as well. There we go. And we are editing, guys. Let's select another one. Here's one of those horses that I was talking about. All right, in point, out point, drag it into the timeline. This is what editing is all about, guys. You're constantly making selections and placing those selections into the timeline. And don't worry, we are never cutting a piece off these clips. We are never touching our actual source clips, which are in the folder on the computer. They will always stay intact. The clips from the project window will always appear here in the source monitor, and then clips in the timeline will always appear in the program monitor. That is the difference between the source and the program monitor. And now I want you to practice that. I want you to make some selections and put them in your timeline. Get used to that editing technique. And then I'll see you back in the next lesson where we are going to go over some troubleshooting, because you might run into some problems, and I know already what those problems are probably going to be.